Come back, and I now turn to further questions from Murdo Fraser.
Thank you, Convener. I'd like to ask about the framework for establishing new public bodies. So there is a draft ministerial control framework that the Scottish Government has been using for the past 2 years that sets out criteria to be applied should a new public body be created. And part of that framework specifies engagement with the SPCB at an early stage to discuss any proposed SPCB-supported bodies and potential impact on SPCB budget. So I've got 2 questions, which I'll just ask together to save time. Have you had any interactions with the Scottish Government relating to proposed new bodies? And secondly, to what extent are you able to feed in the views of SPCB's capacity to provide effective governance?
I can answer in the first instance, yes, the government do get in touch. It's very much official to official, but the government absolutely do get in touch with seeking our views at an early stage. Yeah, definitely, they do follow that guidance. Yeah,
and that's a helpful exchange.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, fine. Okay, I think that's fine. Thank you.
Thank you. And do you want to do your next question as well? Sorry, Mark.
I missed that one. So we've taken evidence on the criteria for creating new SPCB-supported bodies. So criteria already exists. The FPAC committee recommends it should be strengthened and formalised. Do you have any views on how that might be done, how that criteria might be strengthened and formalised? And secondly, who in Parliament should be responsible for assessing new proposals against the criteria?
I'm just trying to think. So there are a range of types of criteria, I suppose, from remit to accountability that would need to be considered. And I suppose within each of the proposals that we currently know are in the mix, in some ways, there are those are the discussions for Parliament, for the committees that scrutinise those proposals, and then for Parliament as a whole. I think quite clearly, in terms of the scope, one of the things that I think we are concerned with is how we make sure that, and this is maybe a refrain of an earlier conversation, that the purpose and function of an office holder is clear, not only to those of us in this place, but also to members of the public who may or may not seek to benefit from their existence. And I think there is something for Parliament to be very aware of in determining those criteria. I don't think that's something for corporate body to determine, given that these are commissioners for the Parliament, not for corporate body, given our very clear governance and accountability mechanisms.
Well, I mean, obviously, at the moment, a new commissioner can be proposed by the government, or it can come through the form of a private member's bill, a member's bill. I think we've realised that even if you were to say that there should be a moratorium on the creation of new commissioners, there is absolutely nothing in the statutory arrangements of the Parliament that would still thereafter preclude a member initiating a bill to create a commissioner. And so there has to be something else that is in place in order for that process to be evaluated. And I think only in as far as we've discussed it as a corporate body have we got to the point of thinking that there needs to be that something. But I think we're rather looking to this committee potentially to identify how that might be regulated within the parliamentary framework, because it's difficult at the moment to see what the obstacle would be. I mean, I can see that you could have informal obstacles that would maybe preclude the progression, but nonetheless, that is not necessarily ideal. I think probably better that there is some way in which these things are properly considered and evaluated.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, that was very interesting. We're all very conscious of the fact that Parliament agreed unanimously to a motion from the FPAC committee last year that there should be a moratorium on new SPCB supported bodies pending the work this committee is doing. Notwithstanding that, these members' bills are progressing. So
exactly, yeah. And in having that discussion within the corporate body, I think the advice and conclusion was there isn't actually at the moment a mechanism, a competent mechanism to stop that.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Moving back to Lorna Slater now.
Thank you very much. So, as we seek to understand the issues around that we're talking about, because there are many and complex, some potential solutions have kind of floated to the surface, and I want to float 3 of them past you, just to kind of get an appetite and feeling for them. So the first potential solution, I think was the convener highlighted earlier, maybe it was Murdo Fraser, would be if the problem is that SPCB is overloaded, Bridgeside House is too full, it's a capacity problem within Parliament. One of the solutions to the problem before us would be to redefine some of these parliamentary supported public bodies as sort of punt them into the more general public body space directly funded by the Scottish Government. That's one thing that we could do. Something else we could do, and maybe these are not mutually exclusive, it seems to me that the creation of new commissioners is in many ways trying to fix the gaps in a system where there have been, for example, scandals which then make people think, oh, we need a patient safety commissioner because it's reacting to a scandal. So a potential solution to that might be to give more proactive powers to existing bodies, for example, to the Ombudsman, to have wider investigatory powers with the intention of trying to prevent such scandals rather than people feeling like they need a commissioner as a redress. And the third potential option that we've floated around here, and I'm aware that some other parliaments have done this, is some sort of consolidation act of Parliament, whereby, for instance, the Scottish Human Rights Commission would have its remit substantially redrawn in legislation so as to incorporate the powers and effectiveness. For example, the Children and Young People's Commissioner has been held up to us as the sort of gold standard of what a commissioner can and should be, but not all commissioners advocacy commissioners are defined in the same way, and certainly the Human Rights Commissioner seems to have quite significant limitations on what it can do in its legislative remit. So I'm interested in your thoughts on those 3 options as we go forward. Are there reasons we shouldn't be considering any of those? And are there any that appeal slightly more in terms of, do they fit? Are they the solutions to the problems that we're looking at?
So I suppose I'm interested in your articulation of those as 3 separate, 3 different proposals, and I think the redefinition question is not one I think that corporate body has discussed before. You know, the redefining and the absolving ourselves of those responsibilities, partly because we respond to what Parliament gives us to do. Parliament passes legislation that creates a commissioner with responsibilities for us. We will take those on. Is that redefinition an option? I mean, it is something that we should probably consider, but that it's not something for us to have a view on, given our role. On the second and third options, I'm not sure, and this might be more a personal view than that of the corporate body, but I'm not sure I necessarily see those as distinct. I think there are opportunities for changing how the different types of commissioners function, and given that we've got regulatory, investigatory and advocacy or rights-based, policy-focused commissioners, can we see an argument for having those consolidation into those different areas? Absolutely, and we've discussed that. Indeed, Parliament's discussed that before, 17 years ago, and 16 years ago, and there was a lot of lobbying from external and some internal groups, and that consolidation didn't happen. So I think that in some ways that's a political that's a political argument. However, I think there are opportunities for specific conversations to be had, and this is where I have clearly two hats on. As a member of the Equalities, Human Rights and Civil Justice Committee, we were preparing for substantial conversations with the proposed human rights legislation about what that would do to the role, the remit, the powers that the Scottish Human Rights Commission had, and what were the opportunities. We were looking at that as, well, what are the opportunities in this for some of the other commissioners that we see being proposed, and to change the structure, to change the powers, to change the remit of that one body to be able to incorporate, maybe not as standalone, well, not as standalone commissioners, but as focused periods of work. And I think one of the conversations we have had as corporate body is that fixing the gap problem that you identify. I think one of the challenges with probably most of the commissioners that have been proposed to fix a gap, to fix a problem, there's no real sense of what they would do once they had to fix that problem, presuming they do. You know, and that's a big presumption. But are there conversations around it, should there be a dedicated piece of work that is done by somebody in the Scottish Human Rights Commission over the next 5 years, for instance? So there's essentially a sunset clause. So it changes the nature of existing bodies. That would require legislation, and from the Equalities, Human Rights and Civil Justice Committee's point of view, we thought we had an opportunity with human rights legislation forthcoming. In the absence of that, I think that there is... We, from corporate body, are looking to this committee to say this is actually where we need to go with those. And I think that fix the gap in consolidation options that you described, I think, actually work together potentially quite well, but they are not without the challenges, primarily because I think substantial legislative change would be required.
That dovetails quite nicely into Richard Leonard's next question.
Could I just, very quickly, just say I was on the committee 17 years ago. I think Annabel Goldie thought I would be out of the way if I was on it, that looked at the consolidation of the existing commissioners that were there at that time. And the appetite of Parliament at that point was to achieve exactly that. And we did come forward with recommendations at that point. But members who were enthusiastic for and had an appetite for doing it were less so when they received the public lobbying in favour of the particular commissioner who was going to be merged in whatever way. And so it was less of a consolidation than we'd imagined. But it does also, just for the point that was made before about the route map, in our discussions with the various commissioners and the Ombudsman and others, there's a certain dismay there that as part of the solution to fix the problem that the commissioner was being proposed, a new commissioner was being proposed to identify, was nobody seemed to go back to the existing structure and say, could you accommodate this responsibility within your existing portfolio? That mechanism doesn't exist when you have a member's bill to create a commissioner and it goes through the Parliament, one is created. So I think possibly, to refer back to the question a moment ago, is there a process that could be put in place that managed these things differently? There's an example of how there was a willingness on others looking at it to say we could have done that.
Thank you. That was very helpful from you both. Well, I was going to say, Richard Leonard has asked about whether additional functions may improve effectiveness in previous sessions. But all three of you have covered a lot of that ground. Is there anything you wanted to ask further, Richard? Or you
no, I think that's fine.
Tend to move on. Okay. Thanks very much. Just moving on a bit more to issues of the financial accountability of office holders. The Scottish Information Commissioner described himself as being financially hamstrung and frustrated by the funding model at present, whereby there is no scope for carrying forward funding and any underspends are lost. Does the SPCB recognise the challenges he is referring to, and what might be done to address this situation And have any other bodies made similar points regarding the funding model or expressed such frustrations?
I'll give an
Alan
initial.
Campbell.
Yeah, I'll give an initial answer. I think I might be the biometrics commissioner. I can't remember who was it that described it that way, but I think what he described there is how public sector budgets work in general. It's how our budget works in general. That's you can't carry over to next year. So I think parliamentary officials would recognise that as well as an issue. So I'm not sure that's a unique thing for the office holders, particularly unless there's another angle to that.
Well, I appreciate it's a wider challenge in the fiscal framework and generally for government too. But you can understand operationally why that would be frustrating. And is there any improvement that can be considered? Or
I don't.
We work obviously within we present a budget to Parliament. The budget to Parliament that we put on behalf of the office holders accommodates the budget representations that have been made by the office holders to the corporate body. The corporate body's responsibility is to scrutinise those and to challenge them. I mean, you know, it's not just our responsibility to say yes, yes and yes to everything. And I suppose from time to time there's been a frustration on our part that having approved the individual office holders' budgets, having made the presentation of the budget to Parliament, we then surprisingly get quite a significant request for a strategic re-evaluation of the needs of the Commissioner in year, and it's very difficult to accommodate that. We have a contingency naturally because there are all manner of things that can materialise in small teams, maternity leave, issues of that character where we have to provide additional resourcing in order to ensure that the Commission is able to function. But I think I go back to what Alan said. I mean, we are working within that environment, and we do our best to encourage the widest possible scrutiny in advance of the budgetary request, because obviously the corporate body is able to go to Parliament, the Finance Committee, with the budget that we think is most appropriate. And if we have been persuaded of the case, then that will be accommodated in the budget that we then present.
Okay. Very helpful. Thank you. Murdo Fraser, you've got some.
Yeah, thanks, Commissioner. When we spoke to the Biometrics Commissioner, he suggested increasing the frequency of his meetings with the SPCB around budget and aligning them with the budget bid cycle. Do you have any views on that, and how would that impact on capacity?
So I think in the move that we are trying to establish to the twice yearly meetings, the focus of one of those would be on budgets, and I see no reason why we wouldn't align that to be the most appropriate timing with budget cycles. So it's something that we are trying to do. We just haven't maybe got there yet with everyone.
It just might be difficult just because of that sort of peak time in September, October when the corporate body is considering the wider budget as well. I have a slight concern about just that tight period for capacity, but it's definitely something we're looking at.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Richard Leonard.
Yeah, thanks. Can I turn to the question of auditing? Because the same Commissioner, Mr Hamilton, who told us he felt he was financially hamstrung, to quote him, also was the author of the view that the audit process, both internal and external, I think was disproportionate and overburdensome. You may have seen that evidence from a few weeks ago. I just wonder whether you've taken a view as a corporate body or as members of the corporate body of that perspective.
I can go first. Yes, we've obviously watched all the sessions with interest, and audits obviously come up quite a bit. I think it's worth probably referring back to an idea that the corporate body had some years ago, I think at the end, 15 years ago, which would have brought all the office holder accounts into the one place, and that would have simplified things a lot. I think that the agreement was reached with Audit Scotland on that, but some of the office holders weren't in favour at that time. It looks like, from the evidence, that office holders would be in favour now of some streamlining of that. So I don't want to say that it's definitely something we can definitely do immediately. I think that we need careful consultation with the Auditor General, Audit Scotland, the office holders, SPCB, but it's certainly something we can take away and look at, and we'll look at what the committee recommends in this area, definitely.
Yes, Maggie Chapman mentioned she had two hats. I've got the hat as the convener of the Public Audit Committee, and the evidence we took from the Auditor General actually was rather contrary to that. I mean, he felt, and it's a view I share as it happens, that there was some value in getting the assurance of a standalone audit. And I think there is a, we explored with the Chief Inspector of Constabulary last week, who's part of the Scottish Government's Consolidated Accounts audit, versus the Scottish Fiscal Commission, which has got its own independent internal and external audit audited by Audit Scotland. I mean, do you have you taken a view about whether there would be merit or not in combining the audit process for all those public bodies?
We've not got to that. We've not got to that extent yet. I think we've taken a corporate body's taken a view that would be something to discuss with the Auditor General, with the appropriate people. We've not taken a view on the merits of that or not.
Okay. I mean, again, without wishing to go down the rabbit hole of the Ethical Standards Commissioner, there is an argument which says that might not have been picked up in the way it was by the audit of Audit Scotland if that had been part of a kind of a more collective audit process. Not inconceivable, it could have been, but nonetheless, that kind of focused attention may not have led to the remedies that were required to deal with the situation.
Perhaps, although I mean, I would pay tribute to the Parliament's independent advisor who liaises with the individual commissioners. And I think that some of the issues were emerging through that conversation, which were then subsequently more publicly identified by the auditor.
Okay.
Thank you, Richard Leonard. We're now moving to an area that will cover reporting and outcomes, and I'm just going to. I'm
happy to summarise the final page into just 2 questions, if you're happy with me.
I've got that feedback. I'm just going to suspend briefly, okay? Thank you.